And okay, so for today's Startup Masterclass, we have Thomas Oren. And I met Thomas years ago at Airbnb. But before that, Thomas had worked at Google, at Twitter, and I think also at Mozilla too as well, right? And and before he's got a very long career in product management, and we're here today to learn about like what's the difference between great product management and early, maybe more beginner product management. So anyhow, maybe I'll let Thomas introduce himself and give us like some insights on who he is and what he's been doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jing. Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure to be here and so excited to hear about the program. So this is fantastic.
Mhm.
My name is Thomas. As you heard, the funny accent is from Germany, which is where I grew up and moved to the US, to San Francisco 14 years ago. The accent is always going to stay with me. I worked for those tech companies, including Google, Twitter, Airbnb, obviously, and also Facebook. Had my own company, have been helping other companies be successful. So I've been a startup advisor and mentor for many years and helped start a bunch of great companies, and have been active as a mentor in that space. And I'm just, in a short summary, I'm just a very passionate product guy. That's all there is. Like, forget all the titles, forget all the experience. I'm just driven by creating great experiences for people that they really enjoy. That's all that's about me.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Thomas, for the intro, and thank you for also giving us a little fun fact about your accent and your origin. So I've got a question that just sort of struck in my mind. You mentioned earlier that you work as a startup advisor to bring great companies, and I wonder if you in your career have seen a fundamental difference in the approach towards product design between companies that really have it together and companies that are, let's say, not quite there yet. Like, what's the biggest kind of paradigm difference you've noticed between successful companies and their interpretation and their let's say prioritization of product versus ones that are less so?
Such a great question. Let me start by saying, even the big glamorous companies do not have it together. So here's a little secret. Like, a lot of the very successful companies do not have it together. And as consumers, we see that every now and then. We fail to believe that they can build shitty products. But even very, very successful product companies build shitty products and they fail. And what they do is I mean, you could say they could do their homework better. Some companies do that in different ways. I'll tell you about that. But also sometimes if you're Google, you have the luxury of just being able to launch a product, see how it resonates with users. And if it's not good, you discontinue it and you build something new. So I just want to say that it's, as a one-person startup, you absolutely have it together, even if this is the first company you're starting. It's not about size or reputation or like maturity of the company, or if this is your first job and you're right of school or wherever you are from and you're building a product. It does not mean that you have to feel inferior over companies that have done that for many years. So I just wanted to say that, not to make you feel better, but it's really true. Like, big companies do not always have their shit together, pardon my French. What is true is that some people, some companies, some organizations build better product than others. And it's also true that different companies build products differently. And yes, it tends to be that large companies have more of a process that's more mature and they have more of like a textbook approach to building product. I'll talk about that in a minute, than smaller companies. So for the large companies, oftentimes there's like a very well-defined process. They have like their user research, they have teams in place that basically capture requirements. They capture all of that in certain documents. Maybe they have templates that they use. So it's very standardized, which is good and bad. It's bad because it's limiting, and it's good because it really helps you move faster. And based on that, you are kind of forced to bring that process, all that thinking into one certain structure and then move on from there. Whereas smaller companies, or if you're earlier stage, you figure all of this out. You might borrow some ideas, or you might borrow some templates, but basically it's like you fail 27 and a half times every day and you kind of figure out what's best for you.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that you build products better or worse than other companies.
All right.
And
Oh,
then I can talk a little bit about just very briefly to address your point about earlier stage product management, product leadership versus later stage, or building, like being more or less experienced in building product. For me, there's only a thing that's good or bad products.
mm,
And the difference is, like, the judge of that is the user or the person you cater to. So as a product manager or as a product leader, the main two questions that you have to ask yourself are, who is this for and why would they care? Your
mm,
superpower as a product manager or a product leader or chief product officer or whatever your title might be, your role in building great products is actually very simple. Your superpower is empathy with the user, and you scale that to your organization. So you figure out what is needed, which can be different from what people ask for, what is actually an unmet need or desire.
right.
Some frameworks about jobs to be done or personas and needs and whatever you want to call it, but it's basically what is needed, what will create, where's that gap, where's this opportunity that creates that tangible positive impact on people's lives, whatever that product is. If you're good at that, that means you have either a lot of experience or a lot of empathy or a great technique, or you have good timing or luck or all of the above.
Right.
But basically, if you focus on who is this for and why would they care, you're already set up for success for building great products.
Got it. Got it. We had a moment with I think it was Scott McCullen. He's one of the Airbnb host product tool designers, product managers actually. And so he mentioned a very similar vein, which was focusing on the problem. He said even if you've managed to identify and come up with this problem that the user is trying to resolve, even if your product isn't perfect, people still use it because it's better than whatever they were doing before. And it sounds like this idea of really understanding this problem and understanding this particular issue, that is where the majority of the focus should go, in fact, and not necessarily in execution, not necessarily in it's almost like the prioritization is so vital. It happens before the problem solving. It happens before the execution. Would you have a similar agreement to that, or is it something of a different flavor from your perspective?
So there's truth to that. I don't want to disagree with that. And I want to say ideally you need both. You need the whole spectrum. And as product builders, as product leaders, what we do is basically we create products from inception to completion that requires a lot of empathy with the user, understanding where the need is,
Uh-huh.
all the way to building the right hypotheses around what could be a product market fit. If you're an entrepreneur, that's all you do. You figure out if and where you can find product market fit and how you can grow your user base, and how you building products that cater to a specific need is part of that.
Mhm.
And then execution is the other part. You can have the best access to or best insights to how to build the greatest product. And you see a ton of amazing products out there that are very poorly executed. So great in theory, but very poorly done because poor quality, full of bugs. And you could see, oh, they had the right sentiment or the right idea, but they just did not translate that into the right product. So the short answer is you need it all. And so you're but not all at the same time. So there is hope. So what we can say there is, um, you need it all, but you have different phases of your product, and just recognizing that there are different phases also helps, because at different times you can focus on different things. So you can focus, if you're at the beginning of a product life cycle, an idea, a company that you start, you spend a lot of your energy, if not all of your energy, on figuring out who is this for, why would they care, where's that product shaped gap
Right.
that I want to fill with life, and how do I create, like, how do I understand my users, their needs, and then build a product that might fit their needs.
Got it.
And then the execution part is equally important, but at a later stage.
Gotcha.
And in between that, you have different phases. For example, building strong hypotheses. If you have a strategy, you have a sense for what you want to build. Instead of gathering your team and starting to build, actually pause and figure out, like, make it very concrete what those hypotheses are, and then what's the fastest way to validate or invalidate those hypotheses.
Mm,
I've helped, I've helped start a bunch of companies. I had my own company. If I could do one thing differently, that would be it. Like, I'm a product guy, so I was like heads down building a great product, and I was excited, and I knew it was going to be hard. It was a two-sided marketplace in the learning space, and I knew it was going to be challenging to build the two sides of the marketplace. If I did it again,
mhm.
I would probably spend a little more time actually not building the product, but instead figuring out the hypotheses that I had
Got
and
it.
testing them, and
Sounds like
testing and finding the fastest and cheapest ways to test those hypotheses. So, for example, imagine like you make a time jump and you have the perfect product, and let's say you built this product that you have in mind, and it's there and it's the best product in the world. No, everyone agrees it's the best product. Are people going to use it, and are they going to use it the way you expect it to be used? So you spend, instead of spending half of your building that perfect product, you
right.
assume the product is there and you figure out, how could you test today if that product works? I'll give you one example from Airbnb, in fact. So at Airbnb, we figured out, in Germany, there was an anomaly that people went through the booking process, and at the very last page, that's the payment step, a
Uh-huh.
lot of people dropped out. And we assumed, we had an hypothesis that it is because people did not see their most popular form of payment, which is kind of a very specific form of direct debit.
Right.
And so it seemed obvious. So the hypothesis was, yeah, of course they drop out because not too many people in Germany have credit cards, and we
Right.
force them to use a credit card, so that's why people drop out. That was the hypothesis. So we jumped quickly to the conclusion, oh yeah, let's build that direct debit for them.
Okay.
But hold on, so we could have spent 3 months with like a team of, I don't know, 10 engineers and lots of pain to actually build that in. It's not trivial because you're dealing with payment systems, and it's like, it's not easy to do. Or you could spend 5 minutes and build a painted door, which basically just shows that option in a drop down of payment options.
Right.
And then the moment someone clicks on it, there's 0 lines implemented for that form of payment. But the moment someone clicks on it, you show them a very friendly message like, oh, we are planning to offer this soon. Thanks for expressing your interest. Please use one of the other forms of payment. That sucks. That's not a great user experience, but you just implemented a micro survey, and you can not only see the votes of people because they clicked on it, but also you see their behavior after. And what we found for Airbnb was, yeah, a lot of people clicked on that and actually would prefer that form of payment, but all of those people actually, or most of those people, went on and picked another form of payment. Those were not the ones that dropped out. So we just confirmed that implementing that form of payment would not increase the amount of completed bookings. And so we
Right.
just saved 3 months and 10 people of engineering. We never implemented that.
Saved a bunch of money. Wow. That was very good.
Yeah. So
Wow.
that's what I mean with building hypotheses, being clear about what you like to prove. For example, can we compete for, if you do, like, you can do the same exercise for user acquisition and growth.
Okay.
Can we like have successful conversions on Google or Facebook for a certain word? Or would people actually click through like a landing page and install an app? You can
Right.
try that without having the app. You do not have to build the app to get, like, with a very small budget, to understand, assume your product is there. Will your growth strategies actually work? You can, like, today, if you have a product idea, this afternoon, you can already try 38 and a half strategies to grow your user base without having that product. Because I can guarantee, for a lot of product problems or initial like go-to-market problems, it's
Right.
not the product that will drive success initially.
It's
The
the
product has to be there, it has to be great, and has to meet all the requirements. But it's your growth strategy or your user acquisition strategy.
that,
As much as I hate to say
that is really really good. That is next level. I never had. I knew about this abstractly when you were first speaking about it. Like it goes back to what Eric Ries said in the Lean Startup about driving out MVP, getting market validation on something without having, but not even to the point of like where you have nothing, where you're just testing it and seeing if it would. I think you used a specific word. It was a like a painted door to sort of
Yeah,
okay. Wow, that blows my mind. I just never
like
thought about doing something like
a
that.
friend of mine tried something in a business. He wanted to create customized chocolate, and you know how you can have a subscription for wines, and every month or so, every quarter, you get a selection of wines. He wanted to offer the same in chocolate because people
Okay,
love chocolate.
sure.
So before building an actual product, he literally created a Google form, or like made it a little bit prettier, but a website that looked high quality, but basically was literally feeding a spreadsheet. And he assembled all this stuff manually and sent it to people in stores, and simulated the business manually without having like any technology behind it. And he did that for 2 months and collected enough data to say, this does not work, and
Saving himself.
stop.
Yeah.
He saved himself a lot. And I don't mean to be negative. I actually think this is a great tool to get you on the right path.
Mhm.
And not to say, oh, try this and then you will be surprised and will not, because I gave two negative examples, right? They're not
But
business
no,
that did not get started. No, but and there are companies, and to your original question, like which companies do this well, there are companies that actually try this and have a great methodology around that. Facebook, for example, has a very high level of rigor around really documenting those hypotheses, having like their data story really together to figure out like what are all the things that we know about the market, the user, the needs, products, competitors, everything.
Mhm.
And then if we had a product in this market, so the hypothesis is we built this product and it will be successful. Let's assume we have it.
Right.
How can we test our main hypothesis for a new product or a new product feature before we even build it? Or what is the minimum we have to build to actually test, get some early data that increases our confidence? Maybe the data is not perfect.
Right.
Maybe it's not super scientific, but it gives you, like, if you offer this new, and I mentioned that painted door example, if you believe that this new feature is going to be killer to get your users to engage more, um, maybe you can offer a preview of that without the actual functionality to some users. Wrap it nicely. Again, that's a disappointing experience, so you don't want to share that with all users, but just with some, and then see what do they like give back to you. And then if the answer is, oh, actually that doesn't change their
Mm,
behavior, maybe you should do something else.
I get it. I get. The way I see it. I just made a mental analogy real quick. It's almost like a movie studio that produces a trailer and sees if anybody
Yep.
watches the trailer and then decides should they build the movie after that experience. Okay. All right. This is a whole new approach. Let me go over to Aldo real quick. Aldo, do you have any questions based on what Tomas has just told us?
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting. The talk is about the how to actually have a success product. So, what do you think? What will be happen if somehow like our hypothesis is already good, but in the reality that our product is not that successful? What will you do with that product? Do you like store it in your database and in your workshop, or you just throw it away? What will you do with that unsuccessful product?
That I love this question. First of all, if you had strong hypotheses, and then you end up building a product based on those hypotheses and it does not work, a couple of things might be wrong, right? So maybe you weren't great at building those hypotheses. So maybe you just made assumptions that you didn't validate. Maybe your validation wasn't good, or your execution wasn't good, or all of the above. So you have to first of all take a step back to say, why didn't we see this coming? Or why did our data, however limited data that was, why did that look more promising than it actually was? Or what's different now? So that's useful. I mean, that's obvious, but it's useful to do. I don't want to say post-mortem, but in that case, when you see, oh, the early tests looked great, but now it doesn't look so great, what changed? Maybe you just asked all your friends and they knew it was your product and they said, oh, this is great. I mean, you make that mistake, but it happens. It does happen that you have biased user samples and not as obvious as I just made it sound, but in some case, it's like a self-selected group of people. And then in reality, those people are not as selective. So that's always something to consider. And then the second part of your question is like, you implemented something, you created a product that does not work. So like with so many other things in life, you have three options. Whether you're in like a job that isn't going well, or you have a product that doesn't work well, your three choices are love it, change it, or leave it. So either you figure out love it, well, it just takes time. It takes time to grow. You can tweak it maybe a little bit, or maybe it just takes a while to adopt or for people to understand. Like the first people who saw cars were not immediately excited because they expected horses.
Yeah.
And I swear, if you could go back, if YouTube existed and we had like documented history of people who were used to mechanical typewriters, which was basically everyone, but mostly like people in offices, and you gave them word processors, they were all unbelievably unhappy, even though the product is clearly superior. But just there's like a switching cost or a change pain for people to go through because they have to learn something new, a typewriter. And even though the first word processors were actually modeled after typewriters, you still have like the carriage return character. We don't have carriages anymore in writing, so you still have that in Word or in other documents if you turn on your control characters.
Yeah.
That is like reminiscent of the time when people had mechanical typewriters. But again, totally superior product, super successful. No one has mechanical typewriters anymore, except for the crazy guy here in Dolores Park. But, no one uses that anymore for actual business, or very few people use that for actual business. It's mostly in museums today. So without a doubt, super successful product. Had you taken a snapshot after the launch of word processors, I would say a lot of people at the time would have rejected it initially and considered it not user-friendly, clunky, hard to learn, because it had such a steep learning curve. It didn't have all the physical switches and things and paper to put in, and it took a while. And then, because it's like, it doesn't go in a straight line from like oh, there's like a typewriter and then suddenly there's like an innovation and it goes up. No, it dips. It goes down. Like if you think of the motivation or like expertise, it dips because people don't know the new technology. And you have the same thing with virtual reality or augmented reality. People don't know how to use it other than for gaming, and some nerds and geeks who have those devices now, but some generations have never seen that technology. If you were to ask them, what would you do in VR? They would not know. But like next week, if they go to their dentist and they are scared and have pain, and their dentist puts them a pair of glasses on where they can actually see dolphins underwater swimming, and they go like, oh, wow, great. That was it? That was my treatment? I didn't even need pain medication. It's actually used in pain treatment in chronic pain, for example. And that's only the beginning. I mean, we're only just seeing some artifacts of this. But also, the hardest part, I think, is to figure out when to pull the plug. So I said, love it, change it, or leave it. So love it is give it time and see if users love it. Change it, obviously, the most important one, like go back to the drawing board. If like along the path, did you really understand unmet needs of your users? Do you understand who is this for and why would they care? Who is this for? Like, what are the different user types? Maybe you didn't pick the right ones. Why would they care? Maybe they don't care if it's not successful. Or maybe you built something for the right people that they care about, but it's not good. User feedback gives you the answer. And then love it, change it, or leave it. So change it. If you get all that feedback and you figure out why people don't like it or why it doesn't solve their problem, maybe it's too clunky, maybe it's not what they expected, you can change it if you can. Or leave it would mean pull the plug. There is also a world where you build something that just does not work. Again, that should happen very rarely because that means you probably did not really understand fully who you're building for. But it also happens more often if you have like super innovative solutions. If you build like AI speech recognition into a product that really doesn't need speech at all, you just overdid it. And if this is your competitive differentiator, maybe that product isn't needed the way you thought it would be needed. But go back to the drawing board. And then if you look at those, especially big companies that have budgets and time to afford to have some losses, I think if you look at the history of discontinued products, you will see that both in hardware and software for big companies that we consider successful, including Apple, Google, Facebook, and so on, you will see the list of failed products and discontinued products is by far longer than the list of successful products.
That's
By far. So as like startup founders and a startup community, you learn to fail early and often, and you learn that failure is part of risk taking, right?
yeah.
And unfortunately, you don't have the financial means or the time or the resources to fail that often on a large scale. So you have to kind of hone in on kind of where you pick your bets. If you have investors breathing down your neck, or you bootstrap and you use your own money, or whatever you do, you don't want to fail too often because you can't afford it. But that's why it's even more important to fail early and often, and kind of before you invest all your money and all your time in building this perfect product for a year and then realize it doesn't work, can you build a prototype, even pre-MVP? Can you test it without having a product? Can you actually do user research, user feedback? Can you build a painted door, whatever it is in your case, and get some data early before you invest more? And then invest in the right place where you realize, oh, actually, what we thought this would be is not the thing, but that this other path is the thing.
Interesting. That's yeah, Thomas. When you just mentioned that, a few light bulbs went off in my head. I remember in my early days, I had a friend who worked at Intel, and he told me that actually there was like 22 teams working on the next Intel whatever processor, but only one of them usually succeeds. So the other 21 teams, essentially, their designs aren't chosen.
Yeah.
So I do get that actually. That triggered a thought. And the other thing is about you were just talking earlier about user adoption, how in the typewriter analogy you have a superior product, and even then it will face steep learning curves, and people might adopt it. Generally, what you've seen in, let's say, great companies is that we we have an SLA internally between the product team and the community management, and so we've divided it this way. We've divided that the product team creates the tool, and the community managers kind of create user adoption for the tool. And then there's a sort of another way where if it's a tool internally for use within the company, the product team creates the tool, and then the HR team gets user adoption for that. I've wondered if that's fundamentally correct, or because I feel like for our situation, let's say HR has the strongest cultural sort of influence, and so it can get people over that learning curve in the most, I guess, most they have most control over that. Similarly for community, but is that the way it should be, or should a product kind of like grow organically by itself and without too much people behind it pushing it out? Like, what are your thoughts?
It depends. So first of all, the first part of your question, 22 teams that work on like that almost compete finding a good solution. That's something Intel can pull off. I call that a chicken race. So you figure out which one is first, and then that wins. That's great. The nice thing is you don't have to be Intel to do that, because what you can do is, even if you're a one-person startup, you can figure out what are the 22 different ways of doing this. And that is a thought experiment that takes you no longer than maybe an afternoon to think about, like, forget everything that we just talked about. Let's figure out what are the 21 other ways of doing this. You could even play a game. Actually, it's like part of a brainstorming exercise to say, how would company X do this? How would Apple do this? How would Google do this? How would Tesla do this? How would EA Games do this? How would they approach the problem? And ideally, you don't need 22 different teams to all develop like a full product and then see which one works. You can emulate that even if you have a very small team. The main thing here is to always look at the problem, the user problem, or the job to be done. If you follow Clay Christensen, the jobs to be done framework, which is fantastic. So always looking at this from different angles and figuring out, like, you have one hypothesis about how this works. Like Airbnb has a hypothesis that guests and hosts connect on a website or on a mobile app, and it's like a two-sided marketplace. What if it wasn't that? It could be like you could solve that problem in a different way. That this might be the best way of doing it, but it might not be. And especially if you push in a new space, or if you want a differentiator, maybe there are 21 other ways of doing it. What if you could not do it this way because you're a competing team and you want to put the other team that you were just part of a minute ago out of business? What would you do to beat them? And you can do that 22 times. So I just wanted to say that Chicken Race is a great thought experiment and actually a good way of brainstorming with yourself or with a team, and also challenging yourself to say, great, we now think we know how we get to success. What if that does not work? What if we wanted to be more aggressive? What if we wanted to just be 10 times better, 100 times better? What would we do? And that's a great, I would say, brainstorming technique without ever building the actual product. Your question, the second part of your question was, you said you have a product team that kind of builds the product, and then you have a community management or HR. And is that the right way to do it? I don't know. I think it heavily depends on the product itself, and it depends on how the product is built. There are some products that are totally fine, built like top down, and it's like a product organization builds the product, and then the rest of the organization helps like educate the community and help them use it, and then they bring back some feature requests, and then the product org like it's very waterfall, and that works pretty well for enterprise type products oftentimes, because they're used to like long turnaround times, and it's very hierarchical, and also most companies that use the type of software are also typically very hierarchical. So that works well for them. They have pattern recognition.
Yeah.
It doesn't work so well for many consumer products. And if you want to build something really innovative, something really different, again, not every product or every space is the right space for that. If you build an enterprise product for like a payment system, that's not what you want. What you want is predictability and reliability. But if you check your posture while you do exercises using an AI computer vision algorithm, then you build a consumer product and you figure out what are the best ways of doing this, right? And so for me, I guess at the end of the day, whatever model you choose, you have to figure out what works for you in terms of who is this for and why would they care. You have this cycle of understanding who your users are, what different user types are, and what their unmet needs or desires are, and then doing your magic, and at the end, giving them a product that you hope fits their needs. And if it does, great, you just found a machine that works, and you keep churning out new features and maybe new products, and you keep delivering delight and useful impact. And if it doesn't, you fix it or you change your job. But if you have teams like a community, or actually not teams, so you have a community or you have a team, you have a community management team, you have HR that could contribute to that life cycle, you have to figure out where to best inject them.
Yeah.
So I know for Airbnb, for example, community managers were instrumental in international expansion. Without community manager, Airbnb could have not expanded in so many companies, because Brian, Joe, and Nate did not initially come up with that big vision of creating a multinational global company.
Right.
They solved a problem first for Rouse Street in San Francisco because they needed money.
Right.
And then solved a problem for a handful of friends in New York, and then suddenly realized, holy crap, they are like travelers coming from all over the world. And before they even planned this, they had an international product. And every consumer company has a different problem. They create a product for a specific market, just for Asia or just for the US or just for Europe, and then at some point they figure out how to expand from there. Airbnb never had that option. Airbnb or any like two-sided marketplace of that caliber is by definition a global product which connects people from and to 192 countries. You don't even have a choice. And overnight, even if you just have three guys, like two design students and a hacker, putting together a small company with no budget, and suddenly that company had to support all the languages in the world and payment methods and currencies and time zones. They were not prepared for that. Right. So the community on the ground helped in many, many ways Airbnb understand what to build for which country, and also help with like the local, like selling the product where it was rough around the edges and where it was actually really built for the US market and didn't really work for a lot of communities in countries outside the US initially. Mm-hmm. So that could be, and in that case, it would have been foolish to not include the community early on in the production process. It does depend on the product that you have or that you build.
Understood. Wow, that was actually really good. You triggered a few thoughts. I like that one of our vision is actually to inspire delight everywhere, everyone, and every time. And when you said delight, I was like, yeah, that kind of, that we think of hospitality as actually like people delighting others, but this idea of the product delighting as almost like the product is a host, and it's there to sort of receive visitors. And
yeah.
About internationalization, that's where I think that's where we met. I remember Julian. He was also talking about, he was involved in the translation process in the Singapore office. He was talking about how he was working closely with you. And in terms of globalizing a product, I think you've had a few experiences, like I believe at Twitter and Airbnb, like really, and I think you opened the door on that one, which is when now is this now like a hyper, because you're talking about 192 different countries now, right? So you have a certain amount of energy and budget, and you need to prioritize that. Where do you start going for first? Do you go for like what are the common problems that everyone faces first, or do you target like, okay, where's the market I'm going to be able to like sort of receive revenue first, and then be able to sort of continue the life cycle? Like, how do you prioritize, and what do you do first, and what can wait for later in terms of internationalizing a product?
Right. So that is the big question, and I would probably be paid big bucks if I had like a simple answer that fits into the framework of the next 2 minutes that I'm going to talk about this. But I don't want to leave you at that. So to me, there are different ways of peeling the different layers off here. So one thing before I answer the question directly is to say, why globalization, why localization to begin with? Well, to increase acceptance of users in locations outside of wherever that product was created initially, right? So if the product was created in the US and it wants to be successful in Japan, there are chances that people in Japan will reject the product because it seems foreign, or it doesn't speak their language, or they're not able to use it because they don't maybe not speak the language, or they cannot pay in yen, or they cannot, for whatever other reason, not use the product. So, and here you have to, so a couple of considerations. First of all, there are different degrees of localization, anywhere from, and I give you a spectrum. One spectrum is no localization. So US English, I'm choosing that example, or traditional Chinese, or whatever you want to pick. Let's say US English, I'm in San Francisco, so there are companies that build a service that's in US English and in US English only. And the product is global, and wherever people use that product, they use it in US English. That's how many products start. And they get a lot of early adopters. They will not get mainstream market that might not be able to speak the language or use local currency or so. So they get a lot of expats. They get a lot of international audience, early like um, early adopters, if you wish, and that might be fine. But they are definitely services that are not localized at all. So you have to go to a .com website. You get US English only. Everything is not translated. And people who speak English well enough and who don't mind that are actually fine with that. If you buy certain consumer products, none of that is translated, and still it's usable for a large enough audience to be successful. So that is possible. And then you have the other extreme on the other end of the spectrum, which is I go to let's say, Japan, I go to the Japanese market, I want to be successful. I do create a whole separate product for Japan that's different from the US product in Japanese, content written, not translated, but written by Japanese native speakers, not translators, and with a Japanese brand name, and everything is Japanese. Twitter did that to some extent. Like when we were not successful with Twitter, like that like group messaging market or microblogging market was taken by Mixi at the time. There was absolutely no chance. And instead of pushing Twitter as a brand, which was okay translated in Japanese, but not great, and was kind of available, but really an American brand, instead of pushing that, Twitter pushed Komodori, which is the name of a small bird and also happened to be a Twitter client, and pushed that. And then suddenly there was like a local, like made here from Japanese people for Japanese application that was made for the Japanese market. And from there, Twitter grew then eventually with that user base into like bringing them more and more on to the standard. But initially starting with a client, a Twitter client that was very different from the standard. It allowed more personalization, had more features, and so on. So we have the spectrum: do nothing to create like a whole different product. It would be like, there's or there was or is a small Airbnb competitor in like South Korea, for example, named Kazaza. I met the founder, a great guy. So to really go all in and to say, oh, if people recognize, like you don't recognize your brand, they want a very local experience, you have to build like a local experience for them. Now, not everyone can do that. And it's also not necessary to go on that extreme. So if you ask me what's the best strategy, I would say, well, I would start with where is your market? So I would start with a business need to come, because your CEO, your founding team, they have to want to expand internationally. And the reason why they would want to expand internationally is because they go after business. And that means you figure out where are your biggest markets. Well, then China always comes up first because they have so many people and so much. And it's also one of the hardest markets for Western companies, but also Japan and a bunch of others. But then you figure out, okay, well, here's my list of like the top markets for that particular product. Now, on that spectrum from do nothing to create a separate product for them, if that was possible, where in the spectrum do I need to go? To give you an example, for Japanese users, they smell when something is translated, because typically, like even if it's beautifully translated by native speakers, the way it's phrased, they can immediately tell if it's written in Japanese or translated. Even in German, I could tell, because the way the way translation works today is you take an English text or whatever the source language is, mostly English. You separate it, you dissect it into every single sentence. You then send that sentence over for translation, and then you get that sentence back beautifully translated, and then you kind of reassemble your paragraph again. Well, that's great. It's beautiful native quality language, but it also means that now you just took over the way like US English works in terms of building sentences. And especially for like when it comes to technical language or like marketing language, US English tends to use short and clear sentences. So if they were to describe a 3-step process, they would say, first you do this, period. Then you do the second thing. And lastly, you do the third thing, 3 sentences. In German, you would feel insulted if that was translated that way, because it sounds like you're talking to a 2-year-old. It's really dumbing it down, because Germans like long sentences, as you notice from how I speak English. They like something.
True, actually.
They want to hear something of sophistication and confidence. So that same sentence would be, after doing step 1, you lead over to step 2, and after that's finished, you conclude with step 3. One sentence long with like, that sounds like it's written in German, not written in English and translated. And the same holds true. So you have to kind of figure out for each of your key markets. Let's say you get your top list of the top 10 markets, you figure out, in order to be successful, how much localization do I need for each of those markets? And that can differ. So I gave you an example from Japan. For Japan, if you want to be perceived as made here, local product, you cannot translate. You have to, and I know, like, before the community yells at me to say, yeah, that's not how we translate anymore. It's mostly how we translate still. But of course, we also have like bulk translation, and we have like more free-form translation and transcreation, where you don't give a whole text to a translator, but you actually give them speaking points or talking points or bullet points. You say, okay, here are the 3 talking points for this paragraph in 100 words or less. Or, like, can you describe these 3 concepts in your own words?
Got it.
Do not look at the original. So that's transcreation. And basically what you say is, here's the idea, go write it in your language. And here's that much space that you have. So you have to figure out exactly how much you want, how much you need. And there are differences. Like, as I said, for just the language quality, Japan is all the way on that extreme. If it's not written in Japanese, created in Japanese, if it's translated, it already alienates. You have to decide how severe that is, but it's not perceived as local. Whereas in most other languages, it's totally fine when it's translated. And there are some languages where it's even okay when it's poorly translated, because they're used to bad translations. I'm not promoting bad translations, but I'm saying for some languages, I could give you a list. It's not worth investing heavily in great translation quality. Again, some people in the community will kill me now, but it is true that that's not going to cost you a single user, because they are so used to poor translation. And for them, it's other things. It's like features, and it's like the way the product is presented, or the way you talk to people. And to sum it up, to your question, what's a good strategy for localization? Well, what I would do is think about, what's the market opportunity? What are your top markets? So literally laying out, for the type of product that you have, what are the top markets? And then doing a market analysis for let's say you grab the top 10. You do market analysis to figure out, how many potential users do you have? How big is the market? What's the competitive situation? Maybe you have a great product for this market, but there's already a local competitor. Like, Facebook would be so great for Russia if Russia didn't have vk.com. vkontakty is a clone of Facebook as of, I don't know, 8 years ago, and everyone is on it. And there's like, even though Facebook now has different features, there's zero incentive for people in Russia to switch over to Facebook now that everyone is on this other product. So there's no way for Facebook to win. So they can win with Instagram and with WhatsApp, maybe against Telegram, who knows. But what I'm saying is, figuring out what is your way to win. And then you can decide, okay, well, in this country or in this market, it's actually totally fine to use our existing product. Maybe US English is fine for the UK. It's not great, it's not perfect, but they will certainly be able to use the product and understand what it's about. Whether you write color with OUR or OR, that's cosmetic, and you could say, yeah, that might cost you a couple of angry people who say, yeah, another American product. But can they use the product, and is that actually turning them off if the features are so good that they don't care if they have if they're missing one letter in a word, you know? So the strategy here has to be to say, oh, let's figure out what is our business opportunity, what are our top countries or top markets, top regions within the same country, if you wish. It doesn't have to be international. It can be expansion beyond like a certain user type. It could also make sense to say, oh, instead of expanding, let's say you're in Indonesia, and instead of expanding into other countries, how about expanding to other user types? So your expansion to pro users could be much more interesting at the current stage that you are than expanding into like 5 other countries with the same users.
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah. I don't have that answer, but those are the considerations where you say, if we offer pro line product, could we tap with the same language and everything in the same country? Could we tap into more users, maybe users that pay more, than expanding the same product to more countries?
That's
Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know the answer, but
that's a fascinating find. Wow, that was. I remember how crucial translation and getting the language right was, and we have a core value here about details matter, but it does seem like that's so fundamental. It's almost not a detail anymore. It's like it's actually so critical to the user experience to have that almost like it's like a respectfulness of the product towards the culture that will adopt it and in a
well,
coming up.
there's a certain thing to yeah, there's a certain thing to say, like on one level, it has to be usable. So if you build a product in a language that most people outside your country cannot use, that's just a limiting factor. So at least you have to offer it in a handful of languages that are distributed. But let's assume you have that. The packaging is everything, and that includes the translation, but it also includes cultural references. So, for example, Google in the early days, um, they had creative error messages. So if you were to go on a page, like a 404 page or so, that
And
did
like
not
Arcade games.
exist, they would say something like, bad server, no donut for you today. So that would also be a joke, right? So
Yeah.
no donut for the bad server that didn't show the page. Well, not everyone in the world knows what a donut is. And if you want to translate that into a language, what do you say in French, or what do you say in German as an equivalent? And that may not be funny. So it's like, so, and if that's translated, you go like, what the hell are they thinking? So it's like, let's say you buy a product, an expensive product or a product that you're excited about, and it comes in shitty packaging. It's like poorly wrapped. I think the Japanese are the best artists I know in the world for wrapping a piece of nothing, like something that's really small, into the most beautiful presentation I've ever seen, to perfection, with origami, like gift wrapping and seamless, like coverage. That's what they expect from experiences and from products as well. So if something, if your start page doesn't look great, they will already judge the product based on that. So for
Wow,
them,
I never thought
being
about that.
yeah,
That is
but now, and again, stereotypes, right? So this is not true for everyone. So take that with a grain of salt. But for
right.
Japanese users, their viewing behavior is that a lot of the presentation is perfect. It's beautiful. It's pixel perfect. It's centered. If it's off by 1 pixel, they will see it. If one button is larger than the other, they will see it. If the font isn't consistent, they will see it. They will not say, "Oh, the font is inconsistent," but they will feel this product is not right. It's not great.
Not
When I
crunch.
worked for Google, when I worked for Google, I went to Tokyo for the first time in 2005, 2006, and I tried to figure out why Yahoo is more popular than Google in Japan. Both American companies. Why
Right.
is Yahoo winning and Google was not? Well, everyone gave me, and I talked to people on the street randomly. Everyone gave me the same 2 answers. One, they said Yahoo is a Japanese company, so somehow the brand managed to be perceived as a local company, and that was because they partnered with a local company, and they were perceived as Japanese. And then two, they said Google is under construction, because when they look at the Google page, remember when portal pages like Yahoo were a thing where you have information density? And at Google, you go to google.com, it's mostly a white page. And that was in the early days of the internet. It's like when 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 the business did not exist yet or the page was under construction. So a lot of people did not quite understand, not because they were stupid, but because it's different from the viewing behavior, where information density is key, and you show value by having like no white space.
Yeah, I
And
remember that.
it's a long scroll, it's a magazine style, like a lot of extra space, like there's no extra space, like all the space is used.
Yeah.
And Yahoo looks like this and caters exactly to that. Like every pixel on your screen is used for something, whereas Google just has an input box and a logo.
That's right. I remember we were debating about this at Airbnb about like the Asian view of like why is it that and you know what that kind of oh whoops sorry oh no Thomas sorry yeah I remember having these discussions at Airbnb early on
Yeah.
about this the Asian view of what a website and app should look like versus the Western, and it almost comes back down to what you said earlier, even about language. That like the American culture prefers things that are more to the point and direct, and Google is sort of like to the point and direct, and Yahoo is that was a really good word for it, information density. I'm going to turn it over to Vidi. Vidi joined us about I think 40 minutes ago. He's one of our guys also on the product team with a computer science background and AI background. Vidi, this is Thomas. Thomas Vidi. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask Thomas?
Hi,
Morning,
Vinny.
Thomas.
Hello, good
Nice to
morning.
meet you. Sorry, I
Nice
was
to meet
late.
you. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you for getting up so early. I appreciate that.
yeah. Apology for the tardiness. Actually, I have a question. I would like to zoom into the company level operational. We have a very small team in IT. We have, I think, uh, a designer, UI UX, Aldo, and we have a CTO, and we have some freelance software engineers. I would like to ask regarding the processes in the product management. I know that in startup companies, usually they use story points to allocate time budgets for a particular
Some
project. Yeah, some do. We kind of have a dilemma or a difficult time assigning a or allocating particular time slot to a particular project, and perhaps this could also be applied for projects throughout the company. Would you like to kindly explain kind of like the intricacies of story points? And actually, my specific question is, how do you even evaluate the complexity of a project?
Yes, great question. So there's a whole religion about this, and different companies do that with different level of rigor. I think overestimating story points is bullshit. It's not a science. There is no exact way. Engineers, like great engineers, will do a good way of evaluating and estimating stories and engineering effort, as will other people for their respective areas. So I think it's a matter of expertise and of rigor, of understanding the requirements and then giving your best estimate. And again, even that estimate can take days, sometimes weeks, depending on the size of the project. So it's totally fine to have a specific task to actually evaluate the complexity. If you do Scrum, you will create some tasks for that only to say, oh, here's that new thing. We don't know about that yet, so let's evaluate. Let's come back with all the stories, and then let's figure out the complexity. So it's a matter of experience to figure out how big or small that task is. Now, story points, to me, I said, is no science. But for me, it's useful nonetheless. And I'll give you two examples. One is, if you have a story point scale, it could be points, it could be t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large, it could be Fibonacci, whatever you pick. The main thing that you want to say is this 1, 3, 7, 13, or is this small, medium, large, or too large for a task that we have to break it up? So basically you get a sense for just roughly how big or small is this? And that's useful because if you are in even a small group of people, if you disagree and someone says this is a 1-point task and someone says this is a 13-point task, you just found a great opportunity to align on what's actually the scope and what are the requirements. And it's not that one is right and the other one is wrong, but that means that problem is underdefined, and that's your golden opportunity to figure out what do we want to do. And perhaps you want to create a more complex thing, or potentially it is a one-point task because what you meant to describe is not a crazy feature, like in my case that I gave earlier. You don't want to implement a new payment method, but you want to create a painted door that just acts as a microsurvey to capture data, which can be done in like half a day. So it's a one-point task. So that's one thing. The second thing points do is if you have like, as you use points, and every team does that differently, but overall, basically just as a measure of small, medium, large chunks of work, plus, minus. It's more like getting an order of magnitude, not about getting the points exactly right. But what that does is, depending on which tools you use, I use Pivotal Tracker or whichever other user used, you can also use a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. But if you add up those points, it does keep you honest. Again, it's like, that's a technique. I forgot the term to it. But if you estimate things, let's say you wanted to estimate how many mailboxes exist in the United States, or how many golf balls fit into like a school bus, or like those kind of interview questions. No one knows. Who measures that kind of stuff? But the way to approach that is by honing in on the order of magnitude, by saying, oh, is it like in the millions or tens of millions or hundreds of thousands? And then you kind of break it down, or like you say, okay, well, however you discriminate, and then you come up with an actual number. And even though you might be off, so it's, if you say it's like in the thousands, not in the tens of thousands, you might still be off by a few thousand, but you're not off by like multiple orders of magnitude. So back to your point problem, I think it doesn't matter if you overestimated or underestimated by a point or two. It's important that you have the discussion whether that's a small, medium, or large kind of task. And then when you add them up, that you get kind of a sense for how much do you get done in a typical release. And again, there's some gray zone. You might be off by some points, plus or minus, but it's rare, especially if you use the method for a while, that you're off by a lot. And it gives you an indication that, oh, if you want to get all of those features done before your magic release date on October 1st, and you're already at twice as many points as you did every single iteration before, that's a clear indication you're not going to do this unless you kind of magically clone yourselves. And vice versa, if you have like way fewer points, that could also be a good time for doing some housekeeping tasks or maintenance, or things that you need to do that are chores and not actual product tasks. So I find them useful, but not if you take them as exact science. And disagreement in the team on points is good to get on a common ground, not to fight over, is this a 1 point or a 3 point task? That is like, okay, fine, let's just give it a 3 and be generous. Next.
Yep. So typically you will have the team to decide. So not the product manager, like a sole voice from the product manager, but the team will decide how much story points to be attributed to particular feature or task. I see. And
yeah, so typically what you do is, like, as you have new tasks, some companies have like a bug scrub or feature scrub once a week, where outside of urgent bugs that need to be fixed, but let's say regular things that get built or fixed, they sit together for 15 minutes once a week and then go very quickly over the 10 new things that came into the pipeline. And then the task is, if you have like you should have an always sorted list of things, like your backlog that you work on, that you find the right place to squeeze in those 10 new things and agree on that roughly. Again, not exact science. You just need to know, is this something one has to jump on like right now? Then it goes to the top. Can it be done in one of the next releases? Then it goes somewhere in the middle. Can it go like maybe perhaps this year or next year? Then it goes all the way to the bottom, or not in the list at all, because then it gets closed as will not do. But this is defined very quickly and rapidly following the rapid iteration or Scrum methodology by the people in the room, and they should have representatives, or in the virtual room, and they should have representatives of people that are involved in the project. If it's an engineering task, engineers should be there. Product helps, or whoever helps define the scope, just to explain what this is. But if we're talking about engineering tasks, engineers set those points. Like I might have an opinion if this is a small, medium, or large task, but at the end of the day, it's engineers who have more experience than I do. And if this is like a task for design or for user research, then the designer or user researcher will have the say on how many points that is, because the engineer can't say, oh, this is totally an easy 1-point task, if the designer says, oh no, I have to whatever, do more things. So everyone is kind of the expert in their field and owns their points.
I see. Actually, this segues to another quick question that I would like to ask regarding the frequency and duration of a Scrum. Has there been any instances that you actually need like 3 Scrums a week? In case of, for example, usually we do Scrums for discovery process, but we realize that sometimes Scrum can also hinders the operational and the execution of a particular plan. How do you find the sweet spot of that frequency and period of a Scrum, actually, Thomas?
Yeah, you want to do it often enough to have a good cadence, but not too often that you only Scrum and not build. I would just experiment, and I think it really depends on your product and the cadence that you want to see in your releases. I've often resorted to 2-week iteration cycles, and then I would dial it up or down as I saw the need. So I would have weekly Scrum when I saw we need to make more progress faster, or have smaller releases and test them more often. And 2 weeks was my standard. Sometimes I had 4 weeks, but then you lose a lot. Then it doesn't feel iterative anymore if you do just one a month. So I would suggest 2 weeks for a start, and then you can dial it up or down as you see, are you meeting too often? The other thing though is to make this like really lightweight. So your Scrum meetings, or even your stand-ups or your retrospectives, can be super quick, especially if you have the rigor to say, when stand-ups, everyone, don't tell me your life story, just tell me if you're blocked on something.
Yep.
Or if something is something that everyone needs to know. We don't need to know that you work or that you do great work. We all know that, we trust each other, we see progress, but let's really focus on here. Like, if we don't hear from you, we assume everything is on track and you do your work. It's not assuming you don't work. So kind of setting this, I know it's like an obvious thing, but sometimes people think they have to talk to show all the things they work on. Let's just get this out of the way and to say it's totally fine in a stand-up to say you're not blocked by anything, pass, next, because then we know you got it. Because let's really focus those like 5 minutes of stand-up or 10 minutes or however much you have on what is something that everyone needs to know, like important things that affect everybody. Like, oh, we just realize that this authentication method does not work, which delays us by 3 weeks. That's something everyone is affected by. Or we are blocked by legal on this thing and we don't know how to get around this, or Google just discontinued that API. Whatever affects everyone, that gets talked about. Everything else, you have your team meetings for that, or you have your shower your coworker with affection and recognition kind of events, whatever people need, but not for the stand-up. So keep them lightweight and easy, but also spend enough time in retrospectives to see. And for like in my company, we did a Friday meeting where every Friday we would just look back at the week and do like a very informal, what are main things that happened this week? What went well? What didn't go well? And that was kind of Scrum light. We didn't go through every task. We didn't do a formal retrospective for our Scrum tasks, but instead we did like a more general, but also very useful, what did we learn this week? What went wrong? How can we make sure that doesn't happen? And what went really well? What do we want more of? And we wrote this down on a whiteboard, or it could be a Google Doc or whatever you want to use. And that alone is like, doesn't take much time and is actually very efficient.
I see. Sorry, I have one very short question. Very last question. I'm very curious about this. Hearing from your, I would like to hear from your perspective on your opinion on rotating Scrum Master. As a practitioner, I would like to know. There are a lot of opinions in the internet, and I've also faced some experiences before. But what are your thoughts on rotating Scrum Master, Thomas?
So you were breaking up for 1 second. Can you repeat the last part of your question? Sorry.
What are your opinion on rotating Scrum Master?
Yeah. I mean, again, it depends on what you expect your Scrum Master to do. It can be anything from something that like anyone can do, because you have your rituals and you have your process, and you don't have to be a certified Scrum Master to go around the room, to do stand up, to write up notes, or to whatever run the retrospective meeting. But that depends on the company. There are some companies that have actually certified Scrum Masters that run a very like structured Scrum meeting. I really respect that and appreciate that. I don't think in many cases that's really needed. But again, it depends. In some cases, it is needed and it's useful. I'm not saying it's not useful. But in the cases that I've been, it was good to rotate just like you would rotate note-taking in meetings. It's just that some people might have different levels of talent. So the rotation has the one negative that not everyone might gravitate toward a Scrum Master role and really manage a room depending on how big the meeting is. If it's very small, it's easy to do. Not everyone is a good meeting facilitator. They have other qualities, and that's also may not be the core of the value that they add. If you have someone who is an engineering architect, they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily in the job description to also be amazing at setting up Scrum meetings. That could be a bonus, but I'm just saying it's like rotating, yes, but also accepting that not everyone has to do the job or does the job the same way. Maybe it's also okay if you rotate and you expect different levels. It's like when we rotate note-taking in meetings, I know that some people take amazingly detailed notes and tag people with action items, and others have notes that are barely readable, but still I appreciate the effort, right? So.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It was very insightful.
Definitely.
My pleasure. Thanks for the question.
And thank you. We've gone over time already, but thank you so much, Thomas, for sitting down with us today, or standing up with us today, and speaking about product management. And I wanna wish you our gratitude for sharing this time and this wisdom
Yeah.
to our progression. And one more thing.